I have some questions for you. Do you consider yourself to be an expert? And if so, how did you become an expert? How long did it take you and what did it cost you? Not just in actual dollars, although that's important, but how much did it cost you in time and effort on your way to becoming an expert? How would you define your expertise? How narrow, how broad is it? And what has being an expert done for you in your life and in your business? Now, the last question that I'll ask you is this. If you consider yourself an expert, do you also consider yourself an authority? And do you know the difference? Good morning, my friends, and welcome back to the show. My name is Blaine, founder of the Coaching Academy and your host for this and every single episode of the always sponsor-free Real Value podcast. Expert or authority? The question that we're pondering in this week's episode, my friends, is whether or not you should be an expert or whether or not you should be an authority and what those differences are. Now, I'm going to save you the time and the hassle if you don't want to listen or watch all the way through this episode. I'm going to give you the answer right now. The answer to this question is that you should be an authority, plain and simple. Now, I'm going to go a step further and actually say that I believe you need to become an authority if you want to make more money, have more success, and more freedom to choose what to do with your time, your life, and your energy. So there you go. Was that helpful for you? Well, of course not, because you need to know a little bit more about what the differences are, why they matter, and how to achieve authority status over simply expert status. Now, before we do that, my friends, if you're an appraiser and you're wanting to build up the non-lender side of your appraisal business, which I strongly recommend that you do, well, then you're in luck, because that's exactly what I did after my own appraisal business was decimated in the 2008 mortgage meltdown. And from that day forward, given the pain and the suffering, I vowed to never let my appraisal business be controlled by market conditions nor interest rates again. And I built up two different multi-six-figure non-lender appraisal companies, and I want to help you do the same. So if this is something you want to do, I've recorded a free 1 hour and 20-minute video training on this very topic. So if you'd like it absolutely free, no strings attached, there is no catch, just go to coachblaine.com/diversify and download it. Again, there's no catch. It's just a simple free blueprint to building up your non-lender appraisal business starting today. Okay, let's get started. Let's start out first by talking about the initial set of questions that I asked all of you, which was about you being an expert. How do we define what an expert is? And how do we know expertise when we see it? Well, quite simply, an expert is typically someone who has acquired an extensive body of knowledge and experience in a particular field, an industry, or maybe an area of study. They're typically some of the most informed folks on their area of expertise, as you would expect them to be, and typically, although not always, have some additional credentials and degrees and or designations that maybe the non-expert doesn't have. They've, of course, poured extensive time and energy and usually financial resources to become that expert, but becoming an expert does not happen overnight. Experience is usually one of the factors that allows one to call themselves, or to be called by others, which is usually the case, an expert. And of course, as you all know, experience takes time, which is why it can't happen overnight. Now, as many of you know, I've always said, and I still stand by the thinking, that you don't really get to call yourself an expert. You can say that you have acquired some expertise in a particular area, but to be called an expert is typically best to let others do that for you based on your knowledge, your experience, and of course, your work. It's far more powerful and meaningful when somebody else recognizes your expertise than when you call yourself an expert, even when it might be deserved. Now, one small but not insignificant quality that I believe experts need to have to qualify for that expert status is their ability to communicate and articulate their knowledge in whatever field or area they have expertise in. You have to be able to communicate if you want to be considered an expert. If you can't communicate or articulate to others the knowledge and the experience that you've invested your time and your life and your resources in gaining, well, you're not an expert, no matter how loudly or angrily you might exclaim your status. And in fact, I'll go as far as to state that I believe the ability to communicate well and articulate your knowledge to others to be more important than all of the degrees, the credentials, and the additional designations. I mean, we all know true experts in the appraisal field that have zero additional credentials or designations beyond their level of licensing granted by the state. Now, conversely, on the other side of this argument, we probably also know somebody with almost every credential offered by the various organizations that are not great representatives of the credentials and degrees and designations because they kind of suck at communication. And quite often, in fact, these people fall into what is often called the expert or expertise trap, which is where the so-called expert essentially stops growing and learning because they believe they've already arrived. They become a slave to their expertise, in essence. And in fact, the expertise trap is characterized by a very black and white view of the world, of your industry, and of right and wrong. There's no place for middle ground when you're stuck in the expertise trap because, well, that would entail an uncomfortable admission. You would have to admit to yourself and to everybody else that maybe you don't know everything. And if you don't know everything, how could you possibly be an expert, is what your mind says when it encounters a challenge to that expertise. In fact, there's a saying that I once heard while I was traveling through the South, and it's this: you can't read the label while you're sitting in the jar. It's also quite often referred to as the goldfish principle. The goldfish inside the goldfish bowl has no concept of itself or of life outside the fish bowl. If you're so smart and experienced that you can never see any middle ground in the areas or field or industry that you're an expert in, well, then in essence, you're sitting in the jar. And as the saying goes, you can't read the label when you're sitting in the jar. Now, by the way, I am not knocking the pursuit of expertise or additional credentials and degrees. Education is education. However, something I consider to possibly be more important than expertise, and it's what this whole show is about, is what we call authority. Now, what is authority in this context? Well, an authority is somebody who likely has expertise, but they also have influence. I'll say that again. An authority in an industry, in contrast to an expert, is likely somebody who has some expertise. It doesn't mean they're called or referred to all the time or considered an expert by others, but they have some expertise, but more importantly, they have influence. An expert has knowledge and experience, but maybe zero influence. An expert has to continue working in their field of expertise, while the authority can start to expand beyond their field of expertise and into other areas and fields because of that influence. An expert on this side likely has to continue to chase down new clients and customers and continuously gain more expertise to remain relevant if they work for somebody else. An authority, on the other hand, while not necessarily an expert, they can be, but they don't have to be. They are typically the go-to person in their field, and they typically have clients and customers lined up outside their door wanting to do business with them. Why? Because they are an authority. An authority will almost always reach more people, have a greater impact on people, be seen as the trusted advisor, and quite simply be able to generate more income from their influence and their authority status than the expert. Is this true in all cases? Of course not. Nothing is true in all cases. But it's highly likely that when you are an authority, at some point, your expertise doesn't matter all that much. While if you're an expert, that's all that matters. Friends, expertise is largely stored up information from the past, coupled with, of course, some kind of experience. Now, I will note, when it comes to experience, it might be theoretical expertise, it might be real-world expertise and experience, which means experts tend not to think about or focus on the future since it's stored up information from the past. All of the steps on the path to gaining that expertise has occurred in the past. Now, that's not to say that experts aren't always updating their knowledge and experience and getting more of that. It's just that the vast majority of what makes them an expert is from the past. Everything that makes them an expert is based on the past with no guarantees of remaining an expert in the future as things change. What this means is that many experts lack vision for and of the future. They lack the ability to think outside the box of their expertise, and they are rarely risk takers. Now, again, this is not all experts. But in general, large majority of somebody who considers themselves an expert but not an authority, this is the case. This is the expertise trap. Now, one of the interesting things or aspects of the expertise conundrum or the expertise trap is something called the Shirky principle, Shirky. The Shirky principle says, in essence, I'll be paraphrasing, is that the expert has a vested interest in seeing things remain the same so as to remain an expert in that domain. They don't want things to change. They are, whether it's conscious or unconscious. It might be a subconscious drive on the part of the expert, but it's a natural part of arriving somewhere after a long, arduous journey of gathering credentials, degrees, and experience. You don't want things to change. So you have a vested interest in seeing that things remain the same. Now, of course, this Shirky principle can be a very conscious effort to keep things the same as well. I mean, think defense contractors being motivated to have the world in constant conflict and at war. They benefit. Think cell phone and laptop makers, Apple and Microsoft being motivated to have their hardware slow down and become obsolete over time. It's called planned obsolescence, in fact. Why do they do that? So that you and I always have to update and upgrade. Think managers and employees of an organization making sure that they never truly solve the problem lest they work themselves out of a job. And think personal trainer never wanting you to really get in shape, or a therapist never really wanting you to solve your internal issues lest you leave them as a client. And that's not to say that all personal trainers and all therapists don't want you to get better. No. But the Shirky principle says that there could be some subconscious holding back in giving you all of themselves so that they'll always have a client. They'll always have a customer. And yes, friends, it's a real thing. Part of the trap of expertise is that some part of the expert hopes things never really change that much, or they'll have to keep gaining new information and experience to remain an expert. Experts tend to crave certainty. That's what they thrive on. Yet certainty is not compatible with risk-taking, nor with taking your life and your business to the highest levels. If you don't take risk, you don't grow. So, what is the antidote to this expert trap, or the conundrum of expertise, my friends? It is to become an authority instead. An authority is visible. They are recognized. They are revered, remembered, respected, and authentic. People know who they are because they're always out front. An authority doesn't feel the need to have the answers to every question or problem because the authority is known for finding the answers instead of always having them. Do you need to be an expert before becoming an authority? Well, most people who understand this topic of expertise will tell you yes, you have to be an expert first before becoming an authority. But I say no, friends. You do not have to become an expert first before becoming an authority in any area or field. I will say you should have some expertise, but that is different than being an expert. I believe you have to have a really good understanding of your area and field of knowledge. And more importantly, you have to have the kind of vocabulary and articulation skills that allow you to communicate your knowledge and your information to the masses in a way that makes the information digestible and useful to your clients and your customers. That's influence. And remember, we said before that the authority has expertise potentially, but also influence. To be an authority, you don't necessarily need to be able to explain physics to fifth graders, for example, but the person who can would certainly be considered an authority even if they were not an expert in physics. Your communication and articulation skills matter. Now, so that I end this episode with some emphasis on why I believe it's so important to become an authority in your field or industry, let's do some easy comparisons so that you get the picture on the differences between an expert and an authority. Now, before we do, let me just say again, I am not telling you not to gain expertise. I am not telling you not to gain additional or advanced credentials and degrees and lots of experience and knowledge. What I am saying is that should you find yourself in the conundrum of expertise and wanting to move out and into higher levels of income and opportunity, becoming an authority is the direction and the focus one should be aiming for. So what are some of the differences between being an expert and being an authority? Well, plain and simple. Experts aren't always clear on how to frame their expertise outside of their field or their industry. In essence, an expert appraiser, for example, doesn't necessarily know how to express to people outside of his or her industry why and how her knowledge and her experience can be valuable to them as well. Where the authorities are super clear. They know who they are, who their ideal clients and customers are, and who they serve and who they don't serve. Why they do what they do, and the ultimate value that they deliver, and they know how to articulate that value to a wide variety of people and domains. There it is again, communication and articulation skills. You have to know how to speak if you want to go to the next level. Now, experts, of course, have very deep knowledge, and they have lots of experience in their industry, and they may actually influence their clients' actions. I do not mean to say that experts don't have influence, but authorities certainly do have some expertise and some influence. The difference between an expert and an authority in this area is that an authority's influence expands beyond their narrow client base to a larger community of typically what we often call key persons of influence. Thank you, Daniel Priestley, for that one. People of influence within their field, maybe people within other related fields, and even the media. That's the authority. Experts are typically always having to continue searching for new customers and clients to express that expertise to. The authority, on the other hand, they're not constantly on the hunt for potential clients because clients tend to be seeking them out instead. Big difference in the expert versus authority. An additional question for you on that note. Would you rather have to be seeking out people to call yourself an expert to, or would you rather have people seeking you out because your name is recognized, remembered, and revered in the market as an authority? Experts aren't always interested in connecting or communicating outside of what is essential for their normal daily work. Authorities, on the other hand, they're focused on the bigger mission and on what we call serving the tribe. And they know that communicating with and engaging with people is part of the bigger mission. With an authority, remember, you have to be recognized, remembered, and revered, and you have to have communication and articulation skills. So the authority knows that it's important to communicate with a wide body and variety of people. The expert, not so much. They typically only talk with people within their industry. And keep in mind, without other people, neither the expert nor the authority has any real purpose. Having influence with a wide variety of people is the hallmark of the authority. And while an expert, they might write blogs, they might make some videos, they might host or guest on a podcast and or maybe do some public speaking to help them attract clients. Authorities, well, they choose content. They make content a priority, knowing that their expertise only influences a relative few, while their authority helps them expand to a much wider circle of influence. Experts on this side tend to be comfortable in their little area of expertise. They may not reach outside of their comfort zone to become known and visible beyond their narrow client base. But authorities, on the other hand, they know the value of positioning and that they must position themselves amongst a wider demographic. And that's why content is so important. If you're in any one of our coaching groups, you know this. We talk about content all the time. Because on the path to becoming remembered, respected, revered, you have to put out content. You have to make yourself visible. You have to cross through the wall from the unknown to the known. And that's why content is so important and valuable to the authority. It helps them become known and have influence beyond their narrow industry. Experts, on one hand, naturally build businesses that depend on their influence within that narrow realm of their day-to-day experience. The expert appraiser builds a business that depends on them being known in that little narrow field. On this side, authorities create the freedom to build a business or businesses that best matches their unique abilities. One of the big differences between the expert and the authority. On this side, the experts typically have only themselves to rely on for income, since expertise is by its very nature all about that one individual. You are the expert, you have the expertise, it relies on you. And you never want to be your sole income earning asset. The expertise is contained within them, and therefore their income relies on them constantly deploying that expertise out in the market. Nothing wrong with that, But if you've taken any of our other courses, watched any of our my other videos, or listened to the podcast, you know that income follows assets. And when you are your only income earning asset, you are a liability. Authorities, on the other hand, have the ability to transfer that authority and that influence onto others that work for them. The bottom line, friends, is that if you want to start to divorce your time from your income, which we always recommend doing, if you want to create a more sustainable future, especially in the appraisal business, if you want to blast wide open the opportunity for more income and more influence, I would urge you to really study up on these differences between being an expert and being an authority, and decide which path you feel is right for you. And if you want help in figuring out which path is right for you or how to become an authority, just reach out to us. Reach out to me. Let's jump on a call. It costs you nothing. I always offer you a free coaching call. If you want to go deeper on this topic, if you want to see the video skill session version of this episode that I did for the Appraiser Increase Academy, just go to coachblaine.com/free month, all one word, and give the Increase Academy a try for free for a full 30 days. No catch, no credit card required, no strings. You'll be surrounded by a pretty significant group of other appraisers, almost all of whom are working on being authorities, not just experts. coachblaine.com/free month to try it out completely risk-free for a whole month. So until I see you over there in the Increase Academy, my friends, or until next week, I'm out.